Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are behind the gathering lawn underneath a big, beautiful Quercus fellows, the willow oak, which is a street tree that is very commonly used in the city of Raleigh. Today we have a program for you all about street trees. We've got our Director of Horticulture, Paige, who's a regular on this program, but we also have a special guest. We have Zach Manor from the Urban Forestry Division of the city of Raleigh. Greg and Zach are going to have a nice little conversation about street trees, what makes a street tree, what makes a tree good for use in urban settings, and it should be a very wonderful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Greg and Zach to tell us a little something about street trees.
Thank you all for tuning in. As we were kind of spitballing topics, this one fell into my lap because of I've spent a day or two doing stuff with urban trees prior to coming here, working for Bartlett and doing all sorts of things there research-wise and others. And this is one of those talks where this is part of my evil plan to not only build my own personal community, but the garden community here and talk to people that are out doing amazing things, making our homes and our streets a better place to live, and doing that with plants. And Zach was kind enough at a call not too many days ago to say, yeah, I've got some time, and showed up today. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the stuff that you do with the city and with trees. I was talking with Barb Fair, who we've done a talk with before, and Barb and Zach have done some things together. So it is a small world and a good community. So very happy to have you here and talk about something that's near and dear to both of us. I've got a whole bunch of questions, and we'll kind of roll through them and hopefully generate some thought and conversation. But if anything pops in your head, blurt it out. But I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one. Kind of explain what your role is, kind of flesh out that a little bit, what the Urban Forestry Department does with Raleigh. I think a lot of people will be surprised that of all the kind of behind the scenes things that are being done. So kind of flesh that out a little bit for us.
Sure. Well, Greg, thanks for having me. It's great to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a beautiful day to be outside as well.
Absolutely.
So urban forestry, you think trees in town, right? But forestry means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So it's habitat, their living infrastructure. There's all kinds of things and benefits that a tree provides to the community that you may or may not realize. So we're in the Parks Department in the city of Raleigh. So we have about 20 staff. And we do everything from the acorn to the stump grinder, as we like to say. So we prune, we plant, we remove. We have inspectors who do regulatory development-related review, tree health assessments, and then we have staff who review new development plans for trees in the right-of-way. So what we oversee are city trees. So that's trees in the right-of-way, city-owned and controlled property. So think street trees, greenway trees, park trees. That's what we're responsible for. So we've got about 1,200 miles of street right-of-way, about 110 miles of greenway, over 200 parks. So quite a bit of assets that we manage on a regular basis.
Living, breathing entities that can do their own things whether we want them to or not, which I think a lot of people don't understand too. So how long have you been, you shared that with me, but how long have you been with the city?
Sure. I've been with the city for 14 years, all in the Urban Forestry Division. I was the tree planting coordinator for a bit, and so we moved around a little bit internal, but with the department and the city for 14 years.
So you've seen a couple things in the treescape of the city as
one
it's
or two,
grown at a exponential amount of speed and time. So I always like to ask people this: what's a day in the life of your everyday work week after you get up in the morning and head out the door? What's your day look like?
Sure. So one of the things I love about it is the variability, right? So I'm in charge of trees, but my job is really about people, right? So interacting with our citizens, with our other partner departments, people from outside that have questions and concerns. So the day is always a little different. Depending on the weather, that could have a significant effect on how my day is going to be. Things that are going on in the political realm, things that are happening day to day, traffic accidents, kind of anything that could come up generally does. So one of my favorite things is variety. But so a lot of what it involved is having conversations with folks. We're talking about pre-planning. We're trying to do some education where we can. We may meet in the field to look at a tree. We may have some concerns that we need to address. So a lot of variability, and if you name it, I've probably done it in the last 14 years. If you're related to trees in the road. Yep.
Right. No, that's kind of what I expect. Kind of in that broad scheme of things, and in the urban forestry department, again, to kind of explain to people the things that go on. What are some kind of current projects that are going on with things that you're doing? And that might involve some of the day-to-day stuff, some of the street trees sorts of things. But what, big or small, what are some of the things you're working on?
So the maintenance, the pruning, and the removal, that's sort of an ongoing thing. That's year-round, doesn't really have a season. We do it when we can and when we're available, right? So as it gets warmer, it makes it a little easier. We deal with a lot of storm work, so branches, things like that. So when there aren't any leaves on the tree, snow for us is great. Ice can be a problem. Wind is a bigger one. So this is actually more of our quiet time, less leaves on the trees, less trees falling over, issues along those lines. But we do respond 24 hours a day. So if a tree falls, we have some staff who come out and do ongoing maintenance, help clear the tree out of the road. But as far as projects in general go, we just completed one from a planting standpoint. So in Raleigh, we have a planting season that we call it. So we only allow trees to be installed in the right-of-way between October 1st and April 30th. We're trying to hit that dormancy period. Doesn't hit it completely. Our calendar changes, the weather changes quite a bit, but our goal is to set those trees up for success. So we're in the midst, coming to the tail end of the planting season. One of the big projects we recently worked on, we're wrapping up our third year of a pilot project called the Street Tree Equity Project. So what we did was use some of our data on where our street trees were. A lot of our friends in the GIS group with a lot more computer skills than I have kind of put together a street tree density map. So we could see how many street trees per 1,000 feet. So we took that information and it could kind of highlight areas in the city where we didn't have that many trees. We then overlaid that with some work our sustainability department did on heat islands. So we overlay those lack of trees with those heat islands. And then the third piece was we looked at sort of our community's vulnerability. So Wake County puts out a great vulnerability index that's made up of a bunch of different factors that sort of rate different areas of the cities based on how vulnerable they are. So that could be anything from income to English as a second language to asthma prevalence. And, unsurprisingly, a lot of those three factors showed up in the same places, right? Yeah. And so what we did was to embark on a program to plant 1,000 trees over 3 years in street trees. So in a lot of situations over time, we've sort of shown up, planted a tree and said, you're welcome, right? Well, and sometimes that's great and sometimes that isn't great. So it sort of depends. So in this case, we really wanted to involve the community. And so we gave folks a choice. We went around, we identified these planting spots. We put a postcard on their door, sent them a mailer, said, hey, you have an opportunity for a tree out front that the city's going to plant and care for. We gave them 2 species. So sometimes they were small, medium, or large, depending on how much space they had, what their particulars were out in front. And they could say yes, they could say no, or they could say nothing. If they said yes, they could pick the tree. We'd make sure they got it. If they said no, we wouldn't give them a tree. They didn't say anything, then we got to pick. So that was sort of the way we went it. And so, like I said, the last of that 1,000 trees is being planted this week and next week. So it's been really successful. We've had a lot of great feedback from folks, and we've gone a long way to get some trees and help our canopy in places that were definitely needed.
That's fantastic. I've done a lot of projects. New York City did a big thing 15 years ago called the Million Tree Planting Project, and I was involved with that when I was at Bartlett. When I was in Charlotte, they had Tree Charlotte, and they did a similar thing. And kind of in the theme of Tree Charlotte, they had a tree tender program. So they used a lot of volunteers to help with. Does the city have anything like that?
Not currently. It is things we're discussing. So we do basically all the maintenance, mainly in-house with a little contractual work.
Gotcha.
So typically if the tree's in the right-of-way, the city's the one who will maintain it. So trying to figure out ways to sort of build up, help the industry out, get some younger folks interested, people's connection to their community. So that's definitely some things we're looking at.
Yeah. And the other thing that triggered a thought in my mind, there's been tons of work done, like you talked about with the overlaying of the heat maps. And I've got colleagues that have spent a lot of time in the GIS world, the mapping and that sort of stuff, looking at things and even developing management plans. But that's a really interesting part of urban forestry, that's a whole nother discussion, I think. But what triggered in my mind was there's been a ton of research done on looking at neighborhoods that are at risk, lower income, lots of other things, and having a tree planting program and involving the community like you're doing reduces crime, it increases community and people's interaction with neighbors that they normally wouldn't interact with, health things like you mentioned, asthma, something as simple as planting a tree. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get you here. Was I think that's such an important part, and that Raleigh is doing these sorts of things, and I don't want that to go unheralded. I think it's a really, really important thing. So thank you for bringing that up.
We did have a couple of questions come in with regards to these programs. Betsy wanted to know which 2 tree species were offered and why only 2 species, and Marilyn wanted to know what were the size of the 1,000 trees that were planted.
Sure. So it was 2 species per location.
Okay.
Right. So we had to identify what trees were available to start with. And then, so not knowing ahead of time, we had to identify some large maturing species. So thinking oak trees, elm trees, things along those lines, things in the middle, hornbeams, maples, things along, and then smaller trees, redbuds, maples that sort of fit in that criteria. So to make it somewhat easy for us to know how much stock is available and for us to be able to get the folks the trees they requested, we had to sort of limit it. So one neighbor may have gotten a choice of 2, the next neighbor may have gotten a separate choice of 2 or the same. So just sort of broken down on the per species count.
Sure.
And for the second question, these are larger 2 to 3 inch caliper ball and burlap trees. So it's a significant tree that we're putting in. We're all for planting small trees, especially in the right of way when we can. But a larger tree tends to get out of the way quicker.
Sure.
And we use a lot of contractors in that regard. So this was planted by a contractor that includes a year of watering and maintenance to help the city sort of catch up. So we went with a larger immediate impact tree in this scenario.
Dahlia had a question that was, if the residents declined the city planting the 2 species option, what were some of the reasons they gave for declining that?
People have a lot of feelings about trees, very strong, right? Sometimes they like them, sometimes they don't. I meet a lot of people that lived here during Hurricane Fran. Those folks don't ever want a tree within 50 feet of them ever again, right? So really from that standpoint, there's a lot of, and a lot of that's on us about education. People have some concerns about trees. They're going to get too big. It's going to be a problem. They bring wildlife. And in some cases, people see that as a positive.
Leaves
Other folks see that as a negative, right? So it's hard to give away trees when people are raking leaves, right?
That's true.
They sort of see that piece. So the reasons are pretty varied, right? And I don't hold it against anybody just because I love them.
Yeah.
You can make your own choices for what you like or what you don't like.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can open the doors to the church, but they got to come in on their own. Right?
Absolutely.
That's as much. And if that's Dahlia, that's my neighbor from Charlotte. Hey, thank you for tuning in. All kinds of things going through my head. One of the things that I have written down, and you've touched on this a little bit, is what do you see as kind of the role and the impact of these programs that you guys are doing, and why are street trees so important? We've talked about a lot of those things, but some of the things that are close to you, why do you think they're so important?
Sure. If you get past all the amazing ecosystem benefits, right? The stormwater mitigation, the temperature control, the CO2 sequestration, the air cleaning. It's a lot about, I grew up as a kid sort of in rural Ohio climbing trees, right? It's that connection to nature that as we get a little more dense and a little more urban, having places like the Arboretum or things like that that are accessible are super important. And in some cases, even this may be too far away for somebody to get to.
Sure.
Having something out front that they can look at every day and identify helps bring a little of that connection. And one of our hopes with this project as well is sort of get some of that buy-in and connection. If people have more say in what happens, it tends to make them more invested. So
absolutely,
as we sort of look at that connection, that's really big for me.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's amazing how something as simple as a community tree planting or being involved or getting that postcard and getting pulled into doing that and selecting something. I live downtown, as I was telling you, and it's nice to see new trees being planted in those areas. I've seen a lot of ambulancure, I've seen a lot of redbud, a lot of carpinus. The diversity is second to none. That's definitely being paid attention to. The other thing, kind of switching gears here a little bit, that I always like to ask people too is, because I'm curious about it, what got you into this career? What pointed you into working with trees from a career perspective?
Sure. So I sort of mentioned as a kid, enjoying spending a lot of time in trees. Grew up in the rural area, wasn't a lot to do all the time, so hanging out in trees was always pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I've always sort of had a love for science, but I'm not really a lab guy. So sort of having that ability to have a job that lets me be inside and outside has that scientific potential, but also has that sort of ability to be out and amongst the things that you're studying. Yep. Was always pretty impressive for me. Plus my wife is an analytical chemist, so I was never going to be out in the middle of the woods in Utah doing some significant land management, right? I had to sort of see that trees in town was that connection for me that when I was a kid, I didn't know existed, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't really a thing that I knew anybody that did. So once I got older and started to see what opportunities there were, it just sort of fit.
And my first career ambition was to be either a zookeeper or a forest ranger and live somewhere like Utah. Or, but to have a family and a life, it's not the easiest thing to do. The upside is we can go to those places when we want to. Yep. But being out amongst green things is very, very important. What are some of your favorite street trees? People are going to ask if we don't cover this. I'll tell you some of mine. And we were just talking earlier about, Raleigh's the city of oaks, and there's already kind of a good canopy of oaks scattered through the city. A lot of nice, big, happy, healthy Quercus fellows, willow oaks. Some of my favorites are some of the different species of oaks, just to kind of break up the monotony of using a lot of willow oaks. In Charlotte, that was kind of the go-to tree. You see that everywhere, and there's some beautiful streets in Charlotte lined with these big 40, 50-year-old willow oaks, but it's nice to kind of up the diversity. You mentioned redbuds. We have a long history of redbuds here. I like things, if you come on one of my tours in the Arboretum, I talk about winter, spring, summer, fall interest, so things that have nice bark, nice fall color, and a nice winter interest are super important to me. I'm a huge magnolia phile, and I would love to see more magnolias in urban landscapes, both evergreen and the deciduous ones, but they need a little more TLC in some situations. What else? What am I missing? What are some things? There's so many different things, but styrax is another small tree that I really, really like. Hop hornbeam, not carpinus, ostraya.
Oh, yeah.
Fringe tree, we talked about that as one. What are some things that you like?
So it's kind of a joke, but my favorite urban tree is one that stays alive and gets out of the way. So that's sort of a piece. And so if you think about a street tree downtown, it's surrounded by concrete, you're interacting with people and pets and cars and pollution and everything. So we get a little more limited in what we can use in some of those contexts, right? So if you think about being able to see through them, I love a magnolia as well, but without it being, leaf to the ground and visibility for cars. We have to factor in a lot more things than we would, say, planting in your backyard. So we talk a lot about, look up, look around, make sure it's the right tree in the right place. For me, it's very site specific, right? Downtown, something that's pretty hardy will get big enough. I like some of the oak species as well. So the nuttals, the overcups, some of those are great options to use. Fayetteville Street is a great example of some beautiful oak tree canopy. And for me as well, the diversity, right? I know a lot of designers like a very aesthetically pleasing, and like my wife likes well-organized nature, right? So being able to balance that look and that feel with having that diversity and insect and disease prevention and staying alive. So I have some favorites around, but it's a little more site specific.
Sure.
Dogwoods are great, but it's pretty harsh out there in the right of way for a lot
Really
of those
hard.
understory species.
Really hard.
So we're always sort of looking for not that next magic tree, because you see that throughout the industry, right? Well, clearly willow oaks was great 80 years ago, right?
Yeah.
For the last, 30 years ago, it was a red maple, right? So those trees sort of hit. Bradford pear had its day as well, right?
Leyland cypress.
Yep. So trying to think about to find that new one, but to still balance it with the ones that work. We're willing to try new stuff when we can, but it doesn't always work.
Right. One of the things that we looked at in my previous career from an urban street standpoint wasn't just kind of the aftercare, but the best way to plant. That's such an important thing, because everything starts with that. And you just mentioned, things that are going to thrive in those super harsh conditions: insect and disease resistant, pollution tolerance, things that can get banged up a little bit, can take a car door, or somebody dumping their ice melt in a tree pit. Or I was driving downtown last weekend, and somebody came out of a restaurant and dumped all their ice and their sweet tea or whatever right in the tree well. Thinking they're doing it good, but Lord knows what else goes into those things. And I'm sure you have stories, but those are the types of things that I think about with good urban trees. And the flip side of that coin, what are some things that you don't like tree-wise?
Well, so again, talking about specifically, so things with fruit aren't great downtown on a sidewalk scenario, right? Like I love, the ability to have urban gardens and have food availability, but there are certain places that it doesn't work. Thorns aren't great for a street tree, right? Yeah. So thinking about those kind of things, we also look from a storm resistance standpoint, things that are brittle, things that tend to break or fail more quickly. The other thing I would say is the general sort of overplanting. There's lots of trees that stay alive but don't really flourish, so they sort of live in that middle ground between not really being successful but not quite enough to be removed.
It sounds like red maple to me.
Well, there is a bit of that, right? I mean, when you take that understory species and you move it out into the light, you're going to have some challenges, I think. So, we don't mind a non-native, right? I know, again, as I sort of said, something that will stay alive and get out of the way, and we look for that diversity of species.
There it is.
Now, obviously, invasives are no good, right? We don't allow that. We don't work through it. We want to be able to have enough of that palette, right? And I know lots of purists and lots of folks, but downtown on Fayetteville Street isn't habitat that's anywhere else here, right? Nothing grew up sort of in those conditions. So we want to be open-minded on that front to allow for the variety.
It's the built landscape, and some trees just don't do well in that kind of environment. And the most important thing, in any facet of life is the diversity side of things, in particularly with trees. And all you have to do is look at, the problems that happened with elms, 50, 60 years ago. If you build it, they will come. Pests will attack those sorts of things. But you brought up a really good point that it's going to help me explain the urban tree thing to people is things that are going to drop a lot of petals or fruit or fleshy things. And I'm reminded of ginkgos. They're great trees, but if you get ginkgos that are going to produce that nice smelly fruit, you're in for a whole lot of really bad emails and bad interactions with your community.
We have a few of those around.
I know. I know where some of them are. When I was at Virginia Tech, they did a planting in front of the basketball arena. It was between the basketball arena and student parking, and it was probably 40 ginkgo trees that would drop fruit down. So not only was it next to the student parking, but students walked through there to get to the dorms and to the classroom, so they would carry all that nice smelly stuff with them, and they didn't stay for very long. But diversity is the most important thing. This is kind of a loaded question, but it's a tree that's a big part of our urban landscapes, and it's something that I probably get asked more questions about. The only thing I get asked more questions about this topic is deer. But what are kind of your takes, because you've been doing this for a while, on the crepe myrtle bark scale?
So I think crepe myrtle has its place. I think in I see it more as sort of a landscape attention species. Yeah. Now they do meet that criteria. They're almost impossible to kill. Yeah. They go very quickly. Yeah. to say they're able to be driven through sounds a little callous, but it's used a lot by departments of transportation because they're a safer, high-speed roadway tree.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, we're not planting them as much anymore. We've kind of made them restrictive just because our ability or a property owner's ability to treat them in the right-of-way is very difficult.
It is very difficult.
So what I would say is, in the right circumstance where you can take care of it, it's great. I would like to see less of them.
Yeah, that's the textbook answer that I try to give people. It's a treatable thing from an urban management standpoint, not so much, not as easy. And it's one of those things that it's going to be around for a while. I think it's going to peak and start to kind of collapse over time. Lord knows how long that's going to take. So I think the best thing is look for some alternatives outside of that realm. It's hard to find something that has all the characteristics and the tough nature, but there are some things that should be substituted.
Yeah, it makes it tough. So Hillsborough Street here in Raleigh is a good example, right? You're out having your cup of coffee, nice along the sidewalk, and you've got sort of a slimy, black, drippy,
the city mold. Yeah.
Crepe myrtle right beside you. So having that sort of challenge in the landscape makes it tough as we talk about the benefits and why we should keep them and all those sort of things.
Yeah. What are some future things that are coming up and things that you're excited to look at from a future perspective that are, kind of in the not too distant future?
Sure. So not specific completely to trees, but the city's working on a few big initiatives. So we've started the Leaf Out program. So that was some direction from City Council for the city to sort of develop a management plan for city trees on city property. So we're working with our Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board, made up of local citizens that are sort of helping us. We're talking to experts. We're doing some surveys. I'll make a shameless plug at the end to go to the City of Raleigh website and look up some of these things. But Leaf Out is a big one that we're working on. The other piece is Raleigh is starting to embark on its 2050 comprehensive plan. So a lot of folks have concerns about development and how that's affecting Raleigh as a whole. So they've basically broken it up into 6 major focus areas. One of those focus areas is trees, and actually March is Tree Month. So back to my shameless plugs, March 11th and March 18th, we're going to do a State of the City that talks about trees in the city of Raleigh at Dix Park on March 11th. And then March 18th at Durant Nature Preserve, we have a speaker coming from Trees Atlanta to talk to us about sort of ways we can work with our community to help build the relationships and nonprofits to get some more trees in place. And the last one is Earth Day and Arbor Day at Dix Park on April 25th. So there'll be lots of vendors, information out there. I think they're going to watch Wild Robot after, so full family affair. So go to raleighNC.gov. Comprehensive plan, Leaf Out, Earth Day, lots of cool stuff going on. For us in general at Urban Forestry, working on sort of, as I mentioned earlier, we've kind of finished that pilot project for street tree equity, but we've also identified a lot of places and next steps. So we're going to look to expand that out, continue it on, just help continue to address those concerns. As most of you are aware, there's been some fluctuation in our ability to be funded from the federal government and sort of how they're leaning towards on things. So we're looking for opportunities to be able to leverage some of the things we've got internally to continue on with that work.
That's great. I'm excited about that. That's good stuff. Well, I have blown through questions, and I hope we have people that have some relevant things to ask us.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay. Jane asked, are there any native trees that make good urban plantings? And you've mentioned quite a few already. Are there some that are better than others, perhaps?
I'm seeing a lot more of our native fringe tree planted. It can get kind of wide, but it's a pretty adaptable tree. Halfway decent fall color, kind of iffy, but the white flowers against a naked backdrop, it flowers before it leaves out. It's a beautiful tree in the spring. Red buds are good understory trees, and they work well underneath that restricted power line kind of zone. Serviceberry do better here than they do in Charlotte, and I see a lot of those scattered throughout the city. There's some native styrax that would do well. The big thing with some native trees is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is availability for the size that you want to plant. I know a lot of urban folks try to swing towards bare root, but that really restricts your planting window and also your species. So it makes perfect sense to me, the size of things you plant, because that's a more physical presence. So that's a difficult thing in selecting some natives. Anything I missed that comes to mind for you?
No, that fits. I mean, if we talk through a lot of the native oaks, some of the southern sugar maples do pretty well here as well. So if you like that sort of maple color and feel, some of those, we've had some success with some Princeton elms, have been pretty good recently. So looking at a larger tree, we don't really get the opportunity to do a lot of sort of hickory or beech in the right of way. Sometimes the size and the growth potential and issues there.
Beech are finicky.
But if you're thinking about sort of things that would work in your yard and not necessarily downtown, even in an urban context, a lot more of those things could be viable opportunities.
Sweet bay magnolia. There's lots of kind of things out there that would be good alternatives.
I mean, if you like an evergreen, a red cedar.
There's some good cultivars, native cultivars. One just popped in my head, but it's gone. Anyway.
That's okay.
Not Hollywood. That's an Asian one. But the native, there's some really good cultivars. Brody.
Okay.
We've got one, I don't know the name of it, right behind us.
Silver spear?
Yeah.
Yeah. You did mention bare root. Does the city of Raleigh do a lot of bare root trees?
Only bare root for us is typically if we're doing some kind of stream mitigation.
Okay.
Right? Those kind of pieces. So most of what we plant in the right of way is either balled and burlapped or containerized. So we do some containerized plantings as part of our volunteer projects. You can't really have volunteers hauling around the 10-foot tree.
Yeah.
So looking at a 5-gallon, 7-gallon, 15-gallon are what we use a lot of the time in more neighborhood residential settings as part of volunteer projects.
No kidding. And you did mention that Raleigh doesn't stick exclusively to native trees, that you do use some exotic species. Is there like some, distribution, you use this percentage natives, or are there any plans to move towards more native tree use, or are you quite content to plant what works?
Well, I think it's sort of a combination. We're always looking to advance that diversity. So if there are more availability in a native or a non-native, we're equal opportunity tree selectors, I think, in that regard. We do understand the benefits of a native and would preach their benefits whenever possible. But I want to say we don't want to limit ourselves in that regard specifically. I think the key is availability as well. Nurseries tend to grow what sells, right? And so if it doesn't sell, it doesn't do them any good. And really, to get yourself a 3-inch street tree, you basically have to start 5 years ago. So as we sort of advance and the community has that sort of desire for more natives, they'll become more available for everybody, I think.
And I've said this before in other contexts, but developing trees isn't like making bread. It takes a long time. The nursery owner has to project, how he's going to get it from a cutting to a saleable product, how long it's going to take, how he's going to do that. And, things like hickories and other things don't behave the same way as other things. And also there's the perception. You mentioned your wife likes the nice, neat side of things. Mine's exactly the same way. I could tell some stories about the first time she saw a Piedmont prairie with me. But, that's a side of it too, is what do those things look like when they're in the container? And they do kind of have to look nice to sell, even to people that are like us that are purchasing them. But having lived in lots of places, having a very critical eye when I travel to different cities, I'm blown away by the stuff that you guys are doing and the diversity that's out there. The thought that came and went, Quercus muhlenbergii, basket oak, I've seen a lot of those planted in different parts of the city. That's a great tree that's just starting to get used in Charlotte quite a bit. But there are a lot of the native things out there already, mixed in with the diversity of stuff, and that's the most important aspect of that.
Yeah, for sure. And like the urban environment, it's a tough environment. Like you need trees, and if they're not all suited to that, then well, you got to do something. Yeah,
I would just add, we do keep track of what we plant, so we can say sort of from a family level how much of what is going in.
Yeah.
But it helps us a little bit because usually it takes a few years for us to figure out if it worked or it didn't work, right?
Sure.
The trees can stay alive on their basic resources for a while unless that external factors take them out. So what's really successful may take us 10 years to know, hey,
Right.
this is a great way to go about it. And so
Honestly,
I think we're keeping an eye on what it is we're doing and trying to be proactive.
that's good. That's good stuff. Okay, so Diane was saying that in her neighborhood, there's a lot of trees being removed to build houses and apartments. She wants to know, is there anything that the city of Raleigh is doing or that they can do to preserve trees on private property?
Sure. So Raleigh is a Dillon's rule state. So all of Raleigh's authority comes from the state of North Carolina.
Okay.
So our authority to regulate private property comes directly from the state through enabling legislation, right?
Okay.
So currently Raleigh is allowed to require tree retention on properties 2 acres and greater. Outside of that, we're fairly limited. Most of what I deal with, like I said, is a right-of-way tree. I don't want to speak too much from our planning side of things, but
Sure.
my recommendation for those folks, what I mentioned earlier, that comprehensive plan piece really sort of sets up the direction of development from 2030 to 2050. So folks getting involved, sharing their opinions, what's important to them. So whether that's their legislatures, their city council, their neighborhood associations, whatever the case may be, we recommend just kind of getting out there and telling folks what's important to you. And the more people that do that, the more it's recognized.
Nice.
I know it's not a great answer.
It is.
It's sort of the answer.
It's
Yeah.
it's hard to. I mean, there's so much work being done to plant cities to increase the tree canopy
Sure.
in most urban cities that, you know, I think most places do a good job of keeping up with the losses from a certain standpoint. It's also hard to stave off tax dollars
Right.
and people moving into areas. You know, it takes time to build a tree canopy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work being done. You know, and the other side of the coin too is the amount of greenway space here compared to other cities. There's much more here than most places that I've lived, and that's an active part of that too.
Yeah.
It's called a greenway for a reason. And the parks, there's tons of parks here.
Yeah, there are.
It's an amazing, it's a commendable system that they have here.
We recently were part of the Wake County tree canopy study. Came out last year. So Raleigh is still just above 50%. So looking at cities of our size, especially in the Southeast, that's pretty significant. I know folks are feeling the difference at the house next door or whatever the case may be. But, you know, to use a tree analogy, of course, is seeing the forest from the trees sometimes is difficult, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about how it affects you changes. And I would also say, the more beautiful a place is, the more people are going to want to come here. So to be able to have places and rooms for folks, make things affordable, sometimes that's density. And so sometimes that density requires us to be a little more focused on achieving green spaces that people can come to that may be a little different from what they were used to traditionally.
For sure. It's a tough balance to strike, but like that's what you're doing, is trying to strike balance between nature and the places where people are actually living. So it's important stuff. Okay, Joan says that she lives in southeastern Michigan and they have an oak wilt problem. Do we have any like significant oak problems down here?
Not that we've seen specifically.
Honestly.
No.
We that hasn't reached us, and that's kind of a new thing. That's you know, they're seeing a little bit of that, I think, in Chicago and some other places in the Midwest. There's some climate stuff associated with that, but it hasn't quite reached us yet.
Okay.
Just, you know, I think it's a matter of time. There's lots of other things out there that had me a little more worried than oak wilt.
No kidding.
But that's not something that we've seen here yet.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Alicia says that she moved down here from New York City and there are so many London plane trees up there, but she hasn't seen any around here. Is there a particular reason for that?
Bacterial leaf scorch?
Yeah. We've, over the years, have done some sycamore London plane tree plantings. They get really big. So space limitations for those, that in our case, a lot of times that's more of a park or neighborhood tree than it would be a street tree per se. They're beautiful when we have them, but again, a lot of disease concerns around those. Like I said, in smaller doses they fit. One of the beauties of here is our ability to grow so many different kinds of trees.
Yeah.
We end up having sort of less concentrations in most cases.
Okay.
Outside
makes
of
sense.
loblollies and sweet gums. Of course.
Of course. So you got to have your sweet gums everywhere. It's not North Carolina without stepping
Right.
on the gumballs.
A lovely fall color.
It's a great,
Honestly, you're not wrong about that. Sweet gums are a truly wonderful tree, if
They're
not
tough.
for
Yeah.
if not
So
for their
tough.
fall color alone.
They're
You
so
literally get every single color of the rainbow, and it can be on a single tree. So they are really, really, really special. That is for sure. I
very tough.
fully support you there. Okay, Jared says that he is looking for a recommendation for a large shade tree that is pretty bulletproof, but he also wants to complicate things a little bit by looking for something rare or unique. Do either of you have any suggestions?
I think Jared needs to come here and walk around.
He does.
And look for some things, because we might have a couple of those things here.
Yeah.
And also, I'll go one step further and say in April, we have our big plant hoedown.
Sure.
Raulston blooms.
Yes.
There might be some things for sale that might fit those niches.
Yes.
You know, that's a question that we could talk on for a long time. If something pops into your head.
Yeah, the only one I'd say I think we don't use enough is basswood. Is a great
Yes.
is a great sort of
Absolutely.
large, pretty southern viable shade tree.
For sure.
That is a gorgeous tree.
And speaking of this arboretum
Yes.
and the diversity that we have here, we got quite a few awesome Tilia species. We got this one over here by our education center that's Tilia henryi.
I
That
love the leaf on that.
the leaf on that with the serrated margins, but then also the flowers that it puts out are incredibly fragrant. It just fills that space
And
with
covered with bees.
covered with bees. Absolutely. They really are very underutilized,
tree.
very
Yeah.
awesome trees.
But it gets big.
That is for sure.
And the bees.
That too. Bonnie wants to know your thoughts on the Chinese pistache tree, particularly the male tree that doesn't produce fruit.
I love it from that's a tree that brings a lot of color to places like Atlanta.
Yes.
That doesn't have as much success with maples as we can. It's one of those trees that is absolutely ugly till it gets to a certain age.
Okay.
In my opinion, great fall color, bright red.
Yes.
There's a cultivar called Keith, I think, that's one of the brightest reds. And there's a couple of other ones, but that's a pretty good tree in terms of not a lot of insect and diseases that I'm aware of. Holds up decently, and I'm not going to say the ice word, but in some trials I read somewhere that it holds up well in those kinds of situations. We've got a couple here. I don't know if it's used. Is it used very much? You guys?
Yeah,
use
we've
it?
got a few places downtown that we use it. It's been pretty successful for us.
Yeah.
I was also going to add, it's sort of like people has those awkward teenage years, right? Where you're a little gangly and,
is.
growing fast and sort of out of the way. But a great example, they're pretty good size at this point, is South Street next to Red Hat Pavilion downtown. We sort of
Okay.
have a row
Yes.
down there where they work pretty well. So
Yes.
I'm a fan, like I said. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to be
The bark is
attractive.
nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reaches a certain age and it just becomes this beautiful kind of
Yeah.
oval tree.
Holds a
sure.
nice shape.
Yeah, but it's as a youngster, it's gangly and it doesn't fit some landscape architects' criteria of all kind of fitting into that box of looking the same.
Yeah, for sure. There's a handful in downtown Durham as well, on like Chapel Hill Road, and like there's this one hotel on that street that's this teal, this like sky blue, and in the autumn time, that blue with that bright red fall color. I'm telling you, man,
It's a beautiful tree.
it'll change your life. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I would agree.
Okay, Stacy wants to know our thoughts on Perodia.
I think that's a good tree. It's another kind of bomb-proof. It's in the witch hazel family, great fall color. There's a lot of work being done on cultivars. There's one called Bell Tower, I think we have here. That's a fastigiate one. That's a favorite of mine. I think a little bit further north and east of us, the fall color is more consistent, at least in my experience. I've got a colleague, a good friend of mine, that did some work doing some wild collected in different parts of its native range, looking for unique characteristics. So they did a big seed banking trip to a bunch of it was all the stands, all the countries with stand at the end of their names, selecting seeds and lining those out to look for ones that were dwarf and different shaped and had really good color. Very soil adaptable. I'm droning on here.
Yeah, we've used them a little bit. it meets sort of North Carolina DOT's right-of-way requirements as a small tree. We've planted probably 50 or 60 on New Hope Road, sort of between New Bern and Lewisburg. So sort of as a median tree. They aren't extremely expressive from a fall color standpoint, but they've all managed to stay alive, other than those that have interacted with cars over the years. But they seem to be doing pretty well. It is a compact tree that works in some of those conditions, which there aren't a ton of. So
we have a lot here, and a lot of their relatives here. So this is a good place to kind of come and look at them. There's a lot of different types. That's one of my favorite trees.
For sure. Rick Ray up in Philadelphia says that they don't plant a lot of trees in the black oak group because of bacterial leaf scorch, and he's heard that willow oak is not as susceptible to that. Do you have any opinions on willow oak?
I know Mr. Ray.
Yeah.
The red oak family is the one that's susceptible to bacterial leaf scorch, not the black oaks. And things in the white oak are a little bit less susceptible. That doesn't mean that they won't get it, but they tend to be a little bit more hardy. Straight red oak, scarlet oak, a lot of those kind of are prone to it. And again, bad cultural conditions, planting trees that are kind of not of the best quality, or you mentioned starting things out with success. That's crucial to the long-term health of trees. And if you plant too deep, if you don't have a good quality tree, it's going to be more prone to those types of diseases. Willow oak is, I think, in that white oak family. In my years of working at the lab in Charlotte, I don't think we had very many samples that came back positive for bacterial leaf scorch in the willow oak. But again, diversity, planting different ones is the key.
Yeah.
Red maple can get bacterial leaf scorch. London plane tree is highly susceptible to that. And again, cultural things. If you have a really bad drought, last year I was working in Philadelphia where Rick is. We had a lot of red maples and red oaks and plane trees just really suffer because of the drought, and then the disease came in.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we got a lot of people are concerned about diseases apparently. Have you seen any vascular streak dieback in redbuds or other trees?
not in any significant
Right.
fashion. So much like you said, we have some individual cases of trees that aren't necessarily doing well that will tend to suffer things that we're not seeing in the rest of the community.
Yeah.
But nothing of any extent, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big scare with the vascular streaking in redbuds a couple years ago, and it really swept through a lot of nurseries.
Yep.
And I think some of that, again, was cultural. I've not seen it in any of our trees.
Sure.
Ones that we've removed for other reasons. We keep a close eye on a lot of them. As you know, we do a lot of research with redbuds currently and in our past. We've got a lot of Denny's babies here that I want to keep alive and healthy and happy. Tom Rainey's looking at redbuds and other things. But, as climate continues to change, as our temperatures continue to rise, as we have these crazy big swings, as we go through droughts, we become more susceptible to those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Not just trees, but us, and look at the whole bird flu thing right now.
Sure. No kidding. Okie dokie. Well, I think that is all of the questions that we have for today. So I will thank you both for being out.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Glad I was able to help out, and always welcome to come back and say hello if the folks demand it.
Awesome.
They might.
They might just. You're a wonderful guest. Thank you for being on our program today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for the midweek program today. We will be back next Wednesday at 3. Greg will be telling us how to prepare our garden beds for the spring. So that should be an incredibly valuable program. We will see you all next time. Y'all take care.